Your Town Matters is funded by the Government of Canada through the Local Journalism Initiative and supported by Cactus Media, Canada's independent community television association.
I'm Vicki Hogarth, and welcome to Your Town Matters. My guest today is the Mayor of Grand Manan, Bonnie Morse. Thank you so much, Bonnie, for coming into our studio today.
Thanks for having me. It's exciting to be back in the studio. Last time I was here was for the Swallowtail Telethon.
Yes, and then we were just recently at the restoration unveiling on Grand Manan this summer. What does it feel like to have that project done?
It was a big sigh of relief to get to the end of the project, and then the ceremony was just like a ribbon, like the bow on top. It was just great to have the project done, to know that Swallowtail is protected for generations to come, and everybody talks about how sparkling the lighthouse is, and it looks like a whole new building. And so we're just happy to have that done, and it's now like the beacon again that welcomes you to Grand Manan, and people are certainly taking advantage of it. So it's great to have that back up and running.
Definitely, in my opinion, one of our provinces, if not the most iconic lighthouse. And as you always say, it's the first thing you see when you get to Grand Manan. It's the last thing you see when you leave. But they've also had a record year in terms of tourism, which comes at a great time for the restoration.
Absolutely. I talked to Ken Ingersoll, the lightkeeper, last night or the night before, just to kind of get numbers, and he believes there's been over 20,000 people visit Swallowtail this summer, which for a community that has 2,600 year-round residents, having 20,000 people visit a lighthouse is really an astronomical number. And recognizing that you're not just wandering into Swallowtail because you're out for a Sunday afternoon drive and you see a lighthouse. That's people who've consciously made a decision to come to Grand Manan. So I think it really speaks volumes about how well our tourism industry is doing, and we're really excited to see that many people coming to Grand Manan and coming back to Grand Manan and still enjoying Swallowtail.
Grand Mananers have a reputation for getting things done when they set their minds to it, and Swallowtail is a great example of that, because it was really all levels of government, but so much came from the community.
From the Grand Manan community and from our mainland friends as well. I think about you guys here who've hosted the telethon, who are really key partners in getting that done. And the Swallowtail, the fundraising committee, I've got to give a shout out to Bart Myers in particular, who really spearheaded a lot of that. We had a lot of really big donors from off-island as well as on-island as well. So just to see everybody kind of recognizing that Swallowtail is iconic for Grand Manan, but it's iconic for the province too. And so it was just really great to see all those partnerships come together. And then last month to be able to celebrate and say, hey, this was really great, look what we did, and just to kind of wrap it up and say thank you to everybody and recognize what an achievement that it was.
Yes, I'll have to show you when we're done filming our big framed painting of Swallowtail in the hallway that now hangs with pride, just for being a part of such an incredible journey.
I think I have one as well. I got from the telethon, from the donations, and I think a lot of people have those, and I think that speaks to how committed people were. And it's a nice recognition to say, yes, I was part of helping to get this project done.
And on good news for Grand Manan, we've been waiting a long time for the return of the air ambulance service. Yes. Talk a little bit about the launch that just happened this September.
So that was obviously a big moment for us, and the plane arrived on the Saturday of the Labor Day weekend, and we had the official ribbon cutting on the Tuesday right after the holiday. And I said to somebody, I didn't realize how much anxiety I was carrying till I saw the plane come in over the hill to land that Saturday. And just to know that the plane is there, and we've closed that chapter, that we have that security, that we have that access to health care again. And so I think for a lot of people, there's just have that reassurance, and to know that that's back in place is just a huge thing for us. So we're very excited that we have that service. And we're really excited. Part of what has happened over the course of the last year and a half or so is they've added an advanced care paramedic to the paramedic team that's on Grand Manan. So they can provide additional services, do additional things that the regular paramedics can't do. And they've become more integrated with the hospital. And I think that that's a really important thing for the island, particularly given our isolation. You know, it's a little bit different on Grand Manan versus in a major center if you have an accident that involves more than one person, that maybe you need those extra set of hands just to be able to help out. So to have that service. And the other thing that it does do is it means that they can travel, they can fly some flights where nurses would have been required in the past. So for the hospital, that means that they're not backfilling for the nursing and things like that. So it's taken some pressure off the hospital as well. So that's been a really good side effect as well. And I think in talking about that, it's really important to recognize the paramedics, the nurses, and the doctors who really bore the brunt of the last 20 months or so in trying to cope with not having the regular service on the island, in looking after patients, whether they're transporting by ferry, whether they have other means coming in. There's a lot of pressure on them. And, you know, we talk about needing the plane to get to the mainland, but really we need the people to get us to the plane and get on the plane and get us there as well. So I have to give a big shout out to them for all their efforts for us.
Like the last almost 2 years, 20 months. And I know we at CHCO have covered a few stories of just things that were potentially tragic that could have happened, but for maybe someone who's watching who's not as familiar with Grand Manan, why is that air ambulance so important? How long would it take otherwise to, and also there's times you couldn't get someone probably to the mainland without a plane.
So I think maybe the best example was the day of the ribbon cutting. Ironically, the plane wasn't there for the ribbon cutting because it was doing what it was there for. It was actually transporting a patient. And so they left around lunchtime, around noon, the patient got to the ambulance to leave, or got to the airport to leave by ambulance. If it had been a transfer via ferry, for example, they wouldn't have made the 11:30 ferry. They would have had to wait for the 1:30 ferry, would have gotten to Black's Harbor at 3 and then to St. John at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. By leaving Grand Manan at noon on the plane, they were to St. John and probably downtown to the hospital by 1 o'clock before they ever would have left the island by ferry. And so those hours can be critical, obviously, when you're talking about emergency situations. That gets compounded, obviously, when you have instances of fog, or if it's at night when the ferry's not operating. That's when it gets more and more complicated, and why having that plane is really critical to be able to access the mainland.
Yeah. And as you mentioned at the event, the plane had to take off before the launch of the official launch.
Exactly. And so, you know, while it was disappointing that we didn't have the plane there for it, I think it really demonstrated why we do need the plane. And I mean, that's what it was there for, was to go to the mainland and take patients who need to go. So it was great to have it there and to really demonstrate this is why this has been so important to us, and it's being used.
And in instances such as if someone has a stroke, why is it so important to get off the island as quickly as you need to?
They have a bypass protocol where they can identify that it is a stroke and not go to the Grand Manan Hospital. They can actually go directly to the airport and leave the island. And so it cuts off a great deal of time. I'm not even going to estimate what it is because I don't know for sure. But it will cut off time, and so those critical first few hours after a stroke, when you can get drugs, if it is a clot, if it has a blood clot as the cause of the stroke, you can get that treatment in St. John much more quickly than if you are waiting to go by ferry.
Mm-hmm. And what are you hearing from islanders about the return of the service? And also, do you think that might maybe encourage some people interested in moving to the island to come?
I think so. I hope so. What I'm hearing from islanders is just relief. They're glad that they have this service, that it's here, that there is a plane on the island, that they'll be able to get health care. And I know for some people who have moved to the island, that was one of the things that they looked at was, you know, that they could still, you know, even though it's an island, you can still get to the mainland when you need to in an emergency. So hopefully that will, you know, provide that reassurance for people that yes, we have the plane, it will continue, and we can still have those services.
I want to talk to you as well about ferry service. Now, I learned this the hard way. Last year I was traveling to the island in October, thought I have ample time to book my ferry, and turned out it was sold out. Now, this isn't a year where there would necessarily be repairs done or to one of the ferries, but talk a little bit about why October, November can be tricky times some years to travel to Grand Manan based on the ferries.
Sure. So normally the ferry has to go to dry dock every 2 years just for regulations, for regular maintenance, that sort of thing. So when the Adventure goes to dry dock, which happened last fall, and the 5 picks up the run, the 5 doesn't have the capacity to deal with the traffic from the island. When you look at the island, our population was up 10% in the last census. We think it's grown since then. We have a very lucrative lobster fishery that ships a lot of lobster, and those are big trucks that are going. The salmon industry brings a lot of feed to the island. Again, big 18-wheelers. Takes up a lot of ferry space, and when you have so many of those, then you can't use the upper ramps, which cuts down on the passenger vehicles. So when the Adventure is in dry dock, we really feel that pinch of, being able to do travel for anything that's not, I'm not going to say emergency, but people basically will plan their schedule around the dry dock periods, because it's not an easy thing to travel during that time. You have to make sure you have your reservations done a week out. If your doctor calls and says, I can squeeze you in tomorrow, you may not necessarily be able to make that appointment because you can't necessarily get a reservation to get off the island. So that's one of the things that we're continuing to talk about, is how do we maximize, how do we expand the ferry service? This is our second year of having an additional 3 weeks to the summer season. So we have an extra week in June, and the ferry service now goes till the end of September. But really, when you look at the travel numbers, it could go till Christmas, just with the traffic that we have. And start earlier in the spring as well, but really that fall time is critical as we get into lobster season, as there's more industrial traffic. It really starts to impact the recreational or the residential traffic that we have.
And you mentioned the idea of an islander maybe having a last-minute doctor's appointment they can't get to. There's other services as well lost in recent years, such as Scotiabank leaving the island. That gives islanders another reason they have to leave. So that could be a huge complication as well, with increased population also leaving for services.
Absolutely. And even, with dental services and some of those services returning to the island, there's still people who travel for those things. And people going to the bank, or people just in their day-to-day lives, are traveling more than they did even 20 years ago. And so we see that every time there's a new ferry, there's like a little surge in people realizing, oh, I can get to the mainland a little bit easier now. And I think we're seeing that in the tourism numbers again in the summer, that, it's not, getting to Grand Manan is more of a challenge than a lot of other places, but it's not as hard as it used to be. It is easier when there's both ferries running to get to the island. So I think that, we've shown that if you build it, we will come and we will use it. And so that's what we're working on now. And, with the Grand Manan 5, it's 34 years old. So it's nearing the end of its life, and we're in conversations with the province. They're starting to do some of the background work on what a replacement looks like, what is the next step with the Grand Manan ferry service. But that's a long process, but it's good to get it started, and we need to keep pushing that process along to see where we end up.
And in terms of services that you leave the island for, there are services that come to the island too. I think last time we sat down, you were having a dentist appointment on Grand Manan. How are you doing with services that either it's someone that's visiting, making time for Grand Manan? How's that working out?
I've seen a lot of success there. It always makes me smile when I drive by and think about what it would be like if I was driving by an empty, abandoned bank building. But when you drive by now, the parking lot's full and there's people there. We've seen a lot of services come, and I know they're still working on bringing others that are there. We have a denturist that's coming this month or next month, I believe, which will be huge for senior citizens in particular, not having to travel, because that's one of the demographics that really struggles with the travel. Like, maybe they're not comfortable driving in the city anymore, but they can still get themselves around on Grand Manan. Those are some things that, I think that's important, that they are able to maintain that independence, and that's what we're seeing with some of those services. So we're still holding out hope for an optometrist. I know there's been some interest, but they haven't made it to the island yet, but we're hopeful. And there's still a glimmer of hope that maybe there might be a credit union in that building someday. So not sure if it would be full service, but there's continuing conversations. So as long as there's conversations, hope is not lost.
And we should say, optometrist, if you're watching.
If you're watching, yes, Grand Manan is a lovely place to spend 2 or 3 days. Yeah, So it is, and I think that that's been one of the success stories, is the practitioners who have come have enjoyed their visits, and they have been full days that they've had there. So it's really great to see that sort of the excitement around that.
Well, if we can get an optometrist come into the island from doing this show today, we have done our job. And
Absolutely.
last time we sat down, you actually did have an inquiry based on us talking about housing on the island.
We did. So big shout out. Thank you, CHCO. We have a developer who's building garden homes on Grand Manan. He had seen us talk about the need for housing, reached out. He's done a development here in St. Andrews. I just drove by on my way into town, which is great to see that, it's a reputable builder, that they have, a proven track record. And so it's starting out with, I believe, 12 garden homes, which is a great start. It gives an opportunity maybe for people who are no longer want to be in their home or no longer want to look after their yards and all of those things. It's an opportunity to move into, a pre-established type of place. And I think it has the potential to maybe free up some existing larger houses that maybe people, the houses become too big for them. So we're really excited to see this happen. There's still a need for affordable housing. There's always a need for rentals on the island, but it's one piece of the puzzle. And I think it's the housing issue is so huge that you're never going to be able to come in with one paintbrush and say, okay, we fixed it all. But this is one step maybe towards getting a little bit of improvement there on the island. So yeah, we're really excited that he has reached out and has chosen to, build on Grand Manan. It's always good to see development.
Yeah, we feel the pinch here in the rural parts of New Brunswick with not always being able to attract developers. So that is exciting. Are you feeling the pinch the same way other communities are around here in terms of just not having a lot of affordable housing available?
For sure, and I think that it's even compounded on Grand Manan that much more, because it's not like you can live in Blacks Harbour and commute to the island for your job. If you're going to work on Grand Manan, you need to have a house or you need to be living on the island. And it's, more people are living on the island, which is great. We've had an increase in population, but it's been really hard for the housing to keep up with that. And, post-pandemic, the cost of building is huge. And so it really becomes that crunch of, how can you afford to build a house, to buy a house? Like, the housing market was really strong here a couple years ago. It's, backed off a little bit, but it's expensive. And maybe if you're coming to the island for a short term, you might not want to invest in a house, but there's not a lot of rental options either. And so it is really a challenge. And I think it's, probably one of the bigger challenges facing a lot of municipalities.
You mentioned Blacks Harbour, and that got me thinking about the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the herring quota. We know obviously how that's affecting Connors Brothers and a lot of people who work out of Blacks Harbour. Is there any effect of that lowering of the herring quota on the fisher people of Grand Manan? So
not a direct impact as far as, herring fishermen. What we are concerned about is more of the trickle-down effect, as the herring stock is cut, as they're processing less fish in Blacks, there's less availability for bait. And that is going to have an impact on the lobster fishery, the concern is this winter. And so I think people are looking for alternate sources of bait, alternate things that they can use. And I mean, it will likely mean a price increase, which of course affects margins for people who are going fishing.
Okay, wow, so to be seen this winter.
Yeah, what does actually happen once the fishery starts in November.
Now I need you to make sure this year I come for setting day. We talk about me coming, and sometimes it lands on a Tuesday and I can't go because that's our bingo day. But please tell people at home why it's so special.
I come from a fishing family, as you know. My father, brother, and brother-in-law are fishing, and now I have nieces and nephews who are going on the boats as well, setting day. It's one of those times where really the community turns out in droves, and you go to the wharf and you watch the boats leave, and it's just it can be very emotional. Particularly if the weather's maybe not as good as what the prediction was, and there's that concern about what's going to happen. And when you're standing there and you realize how much of your family and how much of your community is all in one day leaving, and just it's like a ghost town on the island that day because everybody is gone. But it can be, yeah, it's just a very special time, and then you watch the boats leave. It's a very cool moment. So yeah, anybody who is in a fishing community, if you haven't been out to the wharf, I highly recommend it on setting day. And yes, you need to come over for a setting day, because it's just a really cool day.
So I'm marking my calendar. It's sometime November.
It will be November. The season opens on a Tuesday, which doesn't work out on your bingo schedule. It's November 12th would be setting day, and then that's all dependent on weather as we get closer to that. So.
And speaking of the beauty of Grand Manan, obviously you're known for being so picturesque, but you do have the addition of a new nature preserve as well this year on Ross Island.
Yes. Yeah, that was a really exciting thing that the Nature Conservancy has taken on. It was one of the biggest projects that they have done, and so to have it happen on Grand Manan is kind of a cool thing, because you don't necessarily think about big in conjunction with the island. But Ross's Island is a small island just off the coast of Grand Manan. You can walk there at low tide. So it's just a cool little island, and it's there's still public access available for people who want to go over, hiking, those sorts of things. But for the community of Grand Manan, Ross's Island is actually where the first settlers landed, is on Ross's Island. That was where the first settlement was in 1784. So it's really cool to have that piece of our history preserved as well, and to be able to maintain that public access to it. So I think that's one of the things that we think about, particularly in coastal communities, is how do we continue to be able to access the water and make sure that we're preserving those pieces that are integral to our heritage.
Now, I know we're looking ahead to setting day coming, but when you look back on summer 2024, when you reflect on it, was it a great tourism season? What are your thoughts?
I think it was. It's always hard to tell till you get to the end, but I think the numbers at Swallowtail speak to that. I mean, 20,000 people is a lot, and I'm assuming a lot of those are non-islanders. July always seems like it kind of felt like it started out maybe a little bit slow, but certainly by mid-July, I think the weather turned, if I'm remembering correctly, and August was busy. And I know just anecdotally talking to people, a lot of accommodations were booked. There were some nights where, it was hard to find a room. And so I think that those are good things, that people are out traveling and they are coming to the island and seeing what we have to offer. And, we talk about Swallowtail and all those things, but there's a lot of other really cool things on the island when you start, looking around and just want to take a day trip.
And as you look ahead to 2024, 2025, what are goals council setting and also challenges ahead?
So we're just starting to come into the budget process, which is really when we start talking about what are our goals, what are we going to do. And, recognizing that we're coming up, this will be 2025 is our last full year for this council, and, 18 months really left in this term. So those are some of the things that we want to focus on this fall through the budget process, is what do we want to focus on, what do we want to make sure we do over the coming year. Housing is obviously a huge thing, and it's one of those that we've been working on and will probably continue working on. We've talked about the ferry. That continues to be a big issue for us as well. We took on the management of the roads as from the Department of Transportation Infrastructure. We still have a partnership and a funding partnership, but we're doing that now as a municipality. And so it was a 2-year pilot project. We're coming up on the end of the first year. So, we're starting to evaluate, like, how did this work? What was our budget like? Because we know some things we were way under and some things we way over. So we need to sit down and sort of look and see where we've ended up those numbers, and does this make sense for us going forward, and how are we going to continue this? What was this going to look like? So that will be one of the big decision points, I think, for us in the next year or so. I think about our transfer station is another thing that we've been working on, and we've changed some of the things. We're continuing to improve that service. For anyone not from the island, we don't have weekly garbage pickup. We operate a station where you bring your garbage and we truck it off the island as a municipality. And so, ways that we can, how can we streamline that process? What does that look like? Are there things we can do better? Those are some of the things that we're talking about, and, improving our recycling, some of those types of things. Those are kind of, I think, some of the big goals that we need to work on in the coming year, but we'll sit down and talk about that over the next coming months. So.
And finally, Bonnie, it's so great to have you in studio. Can you tell people at home what you're in town for today?
So I'm in town today. There is the Association of Municipal Administrators in New Brunswick. I hope I got that title right. They're having a couple-day meetings up at the Algonquin, so I'm in town just to check that out today over the lunch hour and a little bit for this afternoon. And so it was a great chance to be able to stop in on my way up the hill. So
Well,
thank you.
Always appreciate when you do, and I hope next time I see you, it's on the island.
I hope so too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, buddy. My guest today has been the Mayor of Grand Manan, Bonnie Morse. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Your Town Matters.